helpful things like that. So I can do
Oh,
that.
yeah. Will you start the recording, or do you want me to start the recording? We acknowledge that we are on the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee, and now home to many diverse Inuit and Métis people. By acknowledging the land we stand on, we are all reminding ourselves of our human connection and the responsibility to care for the land and its people. We reflect on the history of colonialism and its impact in our community, and firmly commit ourselves to listen, learn, and speak the truth on the path to reconciliation. Thank you for joining us in this discussion, and for Councillor Bradford for attending. He will say a few words in closing. We're also happy to see people from the leadership team, Create TO, members of the lead consultants, members of the stakeholders group, the Toronto Public Library, and the Housing Now Initiative, City Initiative. As the SoDa Barns project, as it's now being called locally, South of Danforth Avenue, moves through its second master planning stage under the leadership of Create TO and DTAH architects. We would like to provide the community with a grassroots vision opportunity. The city will hold community consultation. I don't know what that noise is.
Can you please mute Alana? Okay.
Sorry, I've removed them.
Thank you.
Okay. The city will hold consultations with its staff to present the progress of the project and to answer questions. This evening is about the community having a voice. The success of this project will in part be finding the right mix of programming and spaces to meet the needs of the neighborhood and offer something unique to the city. As the Witchwood Barns, a West End counterpart for the SoDa Barns, was developed with DTAH to meet the needs and desires of the community and the location, the large SoDa Barns site, with its potentially diverse mix of housing, employment, culture, and recreation, can be a vibrant hub of activity for this area. During the development process of these multiple buildings, the barns will be upgraded for interim uses by the public. There will be land available for interim use as well. The skylights in the heritage buildings on site, for example, offer the potential of vast light-filled halls and a range of opportunities for regular community programming and one-off revenue-generating events. We want to know what you would like to see animate these spaces. What uses would bring vibrancy and diversity for the long term? What uses would our children, seniors, future generations, and everyone in between benefit from housed in these spaces? This is the reason for this evening's discussion. To provide context for the SoDa Barns, Brian, with the Visioning Committee, that's the group who follow planning and development in the neighborhood, will provide a brief history of the project and the site. Brian?
Thanks, Audrey. And the Civic Car Barns, or the TTC Car Barns as they were known prior to the mid-1920s. And Rebecca, could you pull up that first slide, please, which is the site plan? Is about 5 acres in size. It's quite large. The old car house itself is about 70,000 square feet. 50,000 feet of that is warehouse. The remainder is TTC, dispatch, and other office uses. We have a library on site, which is about 10,000 square feet. That was built in 1988. And Tobias House on the other corner Coxwell and Danforth, is on a long-term land lease built at some point prior to the library, I believe. And then there's a land which currently is being taken up by parking and storage. How did we get here? Well, going back to before World War I, housing was expanding to the East End across the Don River, Queen and Gerrard Streets, and then was expanding northward to Danforth. The city leaders saw an opportunity to expand the streetcar lines, which through the Toronto Civic Railways, which were given the mandate along St. Clair, and they built the Witchwood barn. And then they were given the longest route along the Danforth from approximately Broadview. If we could have the next slide, please, Rebecca. By 1914, the Toronto Civic Railways built the first phase of the car house. This is the jewel in the crown. And that started serving Danforth Avenue. By 1921, this building was expanded and surrounded by a much larger facility that remained on site for TTC streetcar use until the subway was constructed in 1966, when it was converted to a bus facility. And then in 2002, the bus moved to Scarborough. Now, more recent history, in June 2019, City Council agreed to include the property on the city's heritage register, listed, so to speak. And they said in that report, which you can find on the DECA site, that there's an opportunity to adaptively reuse this important landmark that they call the Danforth Car House. One of the interesting things that they said is that there were two really important events that opened up this part of the East End to residential and industrial and Main Street uses. One was the construction of the Prince Edward Viaduct in 1918, and the other was the expansion of the subways or the streetcars and the construction of this facility in 1941. We could go to the next slide, Rebecca, the last slide. I see Mary Margaret is on the call. Mary Margaret initiated in 2016 the Danforth Avenue planning study from Coxwell Avenue to Victoria Park, approved by council in July 2018, with further urban design guidelines approved by council in June 2019. This report concluded for this site that the barns should be a vibrant multi-use community hub and an office employment priority area. It was identified as a significant built heritage resource. The slide that we have here is from the council-approved master plan, which was approved in June 2019. Essentially, through many public meetings and a heritage study, the master plan intention is to guide the redevelopment of the property as a multi-use civic hub in a way that conserves the cultural heritage value of the car house and permits accommodation of the key anchor tenants, TTC, Toronto Police Service, and Toronto Public Library, while leaving room for additional civic, cultural, residential, employment, and other uses. Part of the conclusion of this master plan was also to account for interim uses on the site. Now, last 2 points on the history. 100 years since the opening of the first barn or the expansion, council added this site to phase 2 of the Housing Now initiative, which for the phase 2 had a list of 6 properties that will in some way incorporate affordable rental housing, co-op or nonprofit or other types of housing somehow on this site and 5 others. And in that approval by council, there was a statement that it would have regard for the overall master plan. And finally, where we are now, CREATE-TO in late 2020 has initiated what we call the phase 2 master plan. The phase 1 is the slide you see in front of you, by engaging DTAH architects and ERA architects to examine built form, mixes of uses, residential potential, expanded library, office uses, interim uses, and so on. We haven't seen any information from this work yet. That was just initiated in early 2021, but we're looking forward to seeing that hopefully at some point by mid-year. We really don't have a date yet. That's everything that I have to say on 100 years of history for this site, and the fact that there is a jewel of an opportunity here to do an adaptive reuse project. And a lot of work's been done from the point that I guess Mary Margaret initiated in 2016, the Danforth Avenue planning study and the heritage study. Audrey, back to you.
Thank you, Brian. I'd also like to mention that we're recording this event so that we can compile a list afterwards of the suggestions. And for those who haven't been able to attend, we'll also distribute to everyone involved in the project, and we'll post on DECA's website the list. I'd also like to encourage people to continue to send in their suggestions until May 25th, so a week or so from now, at which time we will do a final compilation. Steve, the co-chair of visiting, will also close the meeting. So please raise your hands if you'd like to speak, or you can write something in the chat. We'll be monitoring both. So, and people will be taking notes. So anyone who would like to let us know their suggestion to start this discussion. Well, while people think about it for a minute, we've already received quite a number of emails from people who aren't able to attend this evening. And some of the suggestions from those are a roller rink, food halls, and various types of gardening. We also have a much larger list that has been compiled by DECA Visioning people that includes community gardens, pollinator gardens for outdoor activities, movie theater, movie screening area, theater area, greenhouse, arts incubator,
Audrey?
vocational training. Yes.
So I think we do have a few people ready
Okay.
to talk to you. So
Great.
Dina, I think I have first, and then Alex, and then Heidi.
So thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Rebecca, for this opportunity. It's amazing. It's going to be astounding because we know already Witchwood Barns is an amazing asset to that community. So it's very exciting. I am involved in a group that is trying to get some land from the city with the help of Brad Bradford for a community garden, with the whole notion of supporting food security, and specifically working with the food bank at Glen Roads at Coxwell, at the corner of Coxwell and Gerard. So we would love to see a community garden. I know it's been said a number of times, and a friend and sister gardener, Anne Howard, is here, and so she's going to say the same. So I don't want to belabor the point, but let's think green. And I'm sure that we will be environmentally friendly, think about everything that we need to do in order to maintain a green aspect. Solar panels would be astounding. That, you know, income, energy generation for our community through solar power would be amazing. And think about modeling, because if we can model there, people can come and see models of environmental best practices. It will assist us in our neighborhood. So thank you so much for allowing me to say all of that. I didn't type it in, but I imagine you're recording it. So yeah, all good. And thank you so much. This is great.
I will say we're recording, and then the chat is also being recorded. So we'll be able to compile all of the suggestions together. And so I'm sorry if I missed you in the chat. I will try and keep up with that as well, but it's recorded. It's there. Alex?
Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I was just really curious. I'm really glad to see a lot of familiar faces from some of the LACs that have happened earlier. It seems so long ago now that it's before COVID. I think I recognize Megan, for example, and Brad. I was curious in terms of two things. One is whatever uses we designate, there's a lot of building going on that site. And I'm just not sure if Megan has an answer, or if anyone has an answer about parking for people who are going to be using those large buildings or accessing the services that are provided on site, whatever they may be, and where that would be located. And then secondly, I think a lot's changed since incidents in the United States for people of color, which has impacted how I see the world, for example. And I'm not sure that everyone feels as equally welcome on site with the presence of the police and the TTC. And I know that there were lots of great ideas about having that space in the center, which is the TTC barns, be a welcoming spot for interaction between the TTC or the police and the community. I'm just wondering if there's been a rethink about that in terms of how it might impact how people feel comfortable or uncomfortable with accessing that space, depending on their culture or if they're from a marginalized community. I don't pretend to represent all people of color, but I can't see everyone's background, but I'm just a little bit concerned if we don't attend to thinking about it.
Do you want, so there are two questions that I'm hearing about, first about parking and then about the police presence. So I feel like, is there someone that can answer the parking question first? Sorry, Audrey, if you know who to call.
I can try, if that's okay. Hi, everyone. Nice to see some of you again after so many years. We are just at the beginning of revisiting the project, but at the moment, the assumptions around parking are the same as in the master plan, where the parking is below grade, below the new structures on the property. So that is the assumption, that continues to be the assumption for parking on the site, is that it will be below grade, but not under the existing garage, just on the areas that are outside the footprint of the existing garage.
But does that mean there'll be no additional parking for people who use the facility, and that's only for the users of the buildings on site, Megan?
I think the intention is that it's a combination of the two. The uses of all the buildings is not yet determined, but there's obviously an acknowledgement that whatever goes into the garage itself will require some amount of parking. So I think one can assume at the moment that whatever parking is built on the site will be a combination of public parking and some perhaps more private parking, depending upon how the uses shake out.
Thank you, Megan, for that. I think, though, we would, because the project is still in the early master planning stages, I think that we shouldn't try and speculate on details like that. I mean, the principle I can appreciate, but I think that we're here today to talk more about very general programming ideas, programming ideas and general uses of spaces and creating spaces, if that's okay.
Yeah, and I would add that I think there has been general agreement that because this is a transit-oriented site, that there was hope that the uses that that we're trying to generate here as a community would focus largely on the types of uses where people would either be arriving at the site by transit, on foot, or by bike. Some people, of course, will be arriving by car. You know, we got to be realistic, but for the most part, we're looking. This is a transit-oriented site and a rare transit-oriented site, and we got to use it well.
And if I may to add to what Steve said, that, you know, since we are targeting net zero and moving toward to the greener, you know, community and society, we should consider whatever it's possible to reduce or eliminate in some cases, the number of the parkings that used to be in the site plan application and approval, and reduce them and use more public transit, bicycles, and you know, foot, basically like a pedestrian to get to the site.
Great. I see some more hands. I think Rebecca,
Is there anyone who can answer the second part of that question about POCs and the permeability of that building structure into police force and the TTC?
Yeah, who can answer this?
Well, the police will be having a community representatives joining their design process along with their architects. So there will be opportunities to ask very specific questions in that format. We haven't heard anything yet about the formation of these group, but can certainly post it on DECA when the police give a shout out for people who would like to participate.
Thanks, Alex. So I have next was Heidi and then Jennifer.
Hi. I want to echo my support for the green initiative that Dina had mentioned, that the site should be as green as possible, include gardens and the like, and also accessible through transit and the importance of that. But I'd like to make a shout out for the Francophone community of our neighborhood that is really large. And I know that there was talk of having a bit of a community hub in this area. And I would like to suggest that it be a French language community hub. In this neighborhood, there are 2 French elementary schools that are French language that have comprised over 1,000 kids. There's a French high school on the horizon, but also there's a lot of Francophone newcomers here for whom French is a primary language. That would be a welcoming space, but not just young people and families, but seniors as well. This is a country with 2 official languages, and not just French language schools, but the immersion system. There's so many families, the Anglophone families and all families whose kids pursue French language education, but they have no space outside of the 4 walls of school to live in that language, experiment in that language, see shows in that language, live in that language. I think we probably have some politicians on the call who also, you know, given the country as it is now, you know, to rise in politics and shape this country, a lot of time French is an important language to have. And in our community, we already have the seeds for how, you know, having a second language is rich, having a third is even better, and fourth. So, but to start with French, I would love to see a French language community hub to support our community in that space. That's all I have.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Hi. So what I'm about to say is a little bit biased. So for those who don't know, I'm the owner of Create Art Studio on the Danforth. And my bias, of course, is towards art spaces. And so I think that having an important, like a really high priority for art community in the space is important, as well as having a lot of public art pieces in the space. And I would love to help out with that in any way that I can. So I just wanted to put that out there, that I'm happy to volunteer and support in any way. And I think that there's so much potential there to really engage with our community through public art. We saw that there was a huge popularity in our neighborhood with Nuit Blanche events. And I think that will only continue with a space such as that. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is my neighbors that used to be beside the studio. And I still to this day get people popping by asking me where the tool library has gone. I think that it would be really great if we could partner with Toronto Public Library to bring another tool library and makerspace like the facilities that they have at the Toronto Reference Library to this space. And given that there's an adjacency with the library already being there, the regular book library, if we could include a tool library too, I think that would be really valuable in this neighborhood. People definitely miss it.
Thank you. There are people from the library in the audience, and our understanding is that the library will be twice the size of what it is now, and include a much wider variety of types of spaces. Brian?
That was exactly what I was going to raise, is that it is our understanding from an informal meeting with library folks maybe 6 months ago on a Zoom call that they're looking at, you know, the definition of library has changed over the decades. This is not a regional or district library location, but they are looking to expand, maybe double it in size. You know, there's a funding exercise that has to happen. And, you know, we're not asking them to speak to that tonight, perhaps at another one of the public meetings that DTAH will be, and Create TO will be organizing, but that's a chunk of space as well that could be quite exciting when it, you know, when it's dovetailed into the property.
I don't see any hands right now. Do you want me to read a bit from the chat? I did promise to go back and forth. Is that good?
Yes.
Okay. Just off the top. So Karen Franzen says, I'd love to see some art, craft studios, workshop spaces similar to what's happening at the Artscape, Witchwood Barns. So art shows, artists, residents, farmers markets, performance space, cultural event hub. And certainly, I think that Brian came up in the library meeting as well, right? That they were talking about having like a small community theater space or something. A lot of back and forth about the name SoDa Barns, which as I believe is a working title. So maybe we don't need to carve it over the doorway tonight. And oh, I see Tom has a hand up. Can we go to Tom?
Sorry, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to, first of all, thank the other participants for their excellent ideas. And I certainly echo that I really missed the tool library that we had. And I just wanted to, I guess, for consideration raise that, like, we are so lucky to have kind of active transportation infrastructure along Danforth. And I've kind of seen how some bike hubs have helped other communities in different parts of the city, like in Thorncliffe Park. And I would really appreciate it if the team could just consider that kind of a space as well, in terms of like a bike hub or helping people with active transportation in general. Thank you.
What would you mind elaborating on what you think of what you would consider the components of a bike hub to be? Is that like bike rental?
No, so there's the Gateway Bike Hub in Thorncliffe Park. So it's just like a volunteer-based organization that helps people like do basic repairs or basic maintenance. Some of the larger hubs have like for children, like a repair to own your own kind of kids bike kind of programs. And I just kind of see like how many people are riding around in our neighborhood right now. And some of them are on some pretty kind of rickety bikes. And I think that it has some potential to support a large part of our community in terms of active transportation and mobility.
Great, thank you.
It's me again. I was wondering if what people thought about a TTC museum here or some space dedicated to the history of the site, you know, more than, you know, the renovation of the buildings, but an actual museum component, you know, either with an old streetcar, there are hulks around that can be purchased, or displays. Because there isn't really a TTC museum in the city of Toronto. It might be a way to sort of add to the cultural layering of this site.
I think,
Amanda?
oh, sorry. Go.
There. I just wanted to echo, I thought, Alex, your point on just having some awareness around police presence at the barns is really, I think that's really important. And so jumping off that point, thinking about two things. One, the Danforth businesses have a high percentage of women entrepreneurs that run small businesses. So it'd be nice to have some consideration around how can we support women entrepreneurs. Obviously, I am one. I own the workaround on the Danforth, but there are many, not just me, on the Danforth. And so calling out some of our strengths, including women entrepreneurs, but then also Black and people of colors and Indigenous BIPOC entrepreneurs, where we can create a space where either there's friendly rent, considering, you know, maybe a deal on net rent versus gross for taxes, just some considerations to make it more accessible, and then really celebrating this as both for the community, but also run by the community, and really leveraging the strengths of the businesses, the types of businesses that are in there. I would love to see real intention around saying a majority of the spaces that are in here are run by marginalized people and marginalized genders.
I'm seeing a lot in the chat. Thank you, Amanda. I'm seeing a lot in the chat about kind of multi-purpose space. So art classes, gallery space, performing arts classes, permanent art market, support for the TTC Museum, Charles Brave. Oh, Montreal has repurposed one of their original subway cars into a public space. Love to see a red rocket preserved, restored somewhere on the site. Sorry, scrolling. Again, for multi-purpose spaces like community groups, farmers markets, there was talk of another comment about indoor farmers market in the winter, entrepreneurial incubator, and something that's like bookable by the community.
Talking about what to do with space at Danforth and
Large scale public art, yes. Is that actually something that's in the works as well? Is like art for the site? Is that something that's already planned for? Like, I don't want to reinvent.
I don't think that has been discussed in any specific way as far as I know. But it is often part of development.
Oh, and I just wanted to read from Susan Martin at TPL. The library is planning to include digital innovation spaces / fabrication space, and will be more than doubling its size. So it's not that little. It's a good size library at Danforth and Coxwell will be twice the size on the site with the fabrication space, for anyone who missed that in the chat.
So I see a food hall here. And we've talked over the years about food or grocery, brew pub, or some sort of cafe, certainly, or restaurant function. Does anyone think we need an actual grocer here? Because we do have a number of small, I'll call them boutique grocers between Greenwood and Woodbine already. Some very good bakers in that strip. Do we see a need for an actual grocer on site, or do we have enough between Greenwood and Woodbine that we could put? There are other uses that people think are better on this site.
I know there was some thought at one point that this could provide the space for a wintertime farmers market as well, when the East Lynn farmers market can't be operating.
We also discussed about having some spaces, provided to companies or studios who are supporting film industry, knowing that they do have, we have is it Revival Studio on Eastern, and lots of people who are working in that industry that can elaborate, spaces and, use the spaces available for them. So that's another thought.
Yeah, just to respond to what Brian said, I think I sort of see this space as an opportunity to complement the businesses we have, not maybe, the last thing we want is to create undue competition for the businesses we have. But I would love to see maybe like a little bit of office space to just, increase the chances of, a lot of people commute elsewhere in Toronto. It would be nice to have 24-hour occupancy on the site, and maybe bolster the lunch crowd in the area to help kind of keep dollars really local. And yeah, I mean, it sounds like we're just still talking about very general principles here. So I know that at some point we talked about maybe making a better connection to the TTC. I know that was a lofty goal, but I don't know if that's still on the table or not. I think that would be really great to make the site more accessible. I'm sure this is going to come up in our general principles, but just making the site as accessible as possible for people of all abilities. I know that frequently we think mainly of wheelchair users, but architecture can also be, accommodate the deaf community, the blind community really well, people with cognitive disabilities. Someone kind of spoke to this also a bit, but I just wanted to articulate it a bit differently. If we could maybe just make sure that, we want this site to be a runaway success, but we don't want it to become such a success that the only people who can afford rent are large corporations. So if we can make sure that there's some kind of program in place to make sure that mom and pop shops can persist on the site, that would be great. And just a general question sort of about this process. My understanding is the library has sort of semi-secured funding, the police have secured funding, the TTC has secured funding, all these other uses that we're describing. What is sort of the process for realizing this what we're discussing today? And how will that sort of be funded, who's going to be deciding what uses the site will be put to, just how can we already make a groundswell to make this realized? And then just as a part of that question, I know there was at one time a talk of selling a portion of the site to a private developer to help fund things. Is that still on the table? And if so, is there any kind of any update on that? And I'm sorry if that was a really long spin of consciousness. I can repeat any of that.
The financial question will go to Create TO to sort things out, of which we have representatives, leaders. Today's, well, there are two things, the interim uses, which, as I mentioned in the introduction, there could be events that are revenue generating that help to support the farmer's market once a week or something. Not really knowing exactly how that's going to be operating at this point in time, we can only try and articulate what we feel really would contribute to our area, and then look at the viability of it. I mean, that's what we really wanted to have today, is that pie in the sky, like, so that we can look at what our neighborhood really needs to be vibrant. Things like light industry have been supported by other people. Places that can support small businesses starting up, something that maybe isn't supported in the neighborhood, like you were mentioning, Jack, before. We don't want to compete with the businesses, but we do want to provide support for greater diversity and things like that. So I'm not, there are people who could probably address your question, but I'm not sure this is the forum today to look at those financial issues, if that's okay.
And I would add that, Jack, your instincts are bang on, at least, or Jane Jacobs would certainly say that. The urbanist and an author made the point specifically about this site, and actually a site at Danforth and Woodbine, that we should be focused, if we're looking to use this site to help regenerate vitality on the Danforth. We should be looking toward employment as much as possible, because that would bring people to the site day in, day out, and create, for example, the lunchtime crowd that the local restaurants and shops require. So,
if I can just put 2 cents in here, I'm going to sort of put something personal. My background is in the entertainment industry. I've worked in film, I've worked in theater, and I was part of the first group of staff that started the Young Dundas Square. So I've had a huge, vast experience in special events and doing all of that kind of thing. Statistically, more people who work in the arts live in the East End. We have nowhere to work. We have no theater here. We have no entertainment space. We have to go to the West End. We have to go downtown. I was just meeting last week. I still work a bit in the theater, and I just met with a group of people, investors who are seriously interested in looking at investing something in the East End. They can't find the space. There isn't the space. And I was mentioning the fact about this thing was happening in my neighborhood in this meeting, and they said, oh my God, this is rich for a multimedia arts hub that could address so many of those questions. I've only seen one response to some making it kind of an arts hub. So I'm just wondering, the problem is it's cart and horse. If you don't build a space for the artists to come, they won't come. But the fact is the artists are not in any position to build the space. So the thing is, how does funding and how does support happen that they can get that space, sort of like an artscape scenario where the space would be there and then they would use it. If there's a blank space to do an event, events would happen. But if you don't allocate space for an event, it won't happen. So is there any procedure that we figured out how we find the funding or support to have that happen?
I don't know, Joan has is responding to the other person that's speaking. Please go ahead if you are.
I'm responding to 2 or 3 people back.
Oh,
and I do have something to say to Christine as well. But I walk along the Danforth a lot now. I live in the Kingston Road neighborhood, but I now have a grandchild up in that neighborhood, and I do a lot of walking, and I love the neighborhood. I am concerned, and Jack, you alluded to this, around not competing with those great coffee shops that have grown up. There's some amazing stores, Bear Market, like all these amazing stores that I don't feel it's right, of course, to compete with. I frequent Evergreen Brickworks. I used to go to the West End North, Christie, the other place, Witchwood. Go there. It's impossible to park. It's such a great space, but I feel that it's kind of gotten over programmed, it's too big. But they have such great things. Like the Brickworks has the bike shop, where you can donate bikes or work on bikes or whatever. They've got Cafe Belong, which of course is perfect for there because they don't have a cafe, like I say. But we do need to have something in there that would draw people in, maybe with their coffee and with their cake or whatever. Also, Christine, we do have a theater, a really good theater. I can't remember the name of it, at Carlaw and Dundas.
Oh, Crow's
And-
Nest.
Pardon me?
Crow's Nest Theater.
Yeah, no, I know all of the theaters, but they're not, that's not a good theater.
Hang on just a second. We also have one farther along the Danforth, the very small one.
The coal mine.
Coal mine, yeah. So we do have 2, but I completely agree that
2 is not 2, that's it.
No, I know, and we do need to have something bigger and better, but also, how do we, do we add to them? Do we take away from them? That's my worry.
As somebody who's worked in the industry for many years and lived in this area for over 25 years, there is not enough space. We're trying to work on shows that we want to hope and get up by December. We can't find a place in the East End. We'll end up going back to Artscape because they have a space. There is no space to do it. The thing is that both of those spaces are privately, the one down at Gerard is privately built and deeded to that particular theater company. If I wanted to come in with a show, I can't because it's to that theater company. What we're looking at is a space that's you can come in with your children's theater at noon to bring traffic in at lunch, to sort of have different kinds of events. You can have film screenings. You could maybe get stuff that TIFF would bring out here at this end of the city. There's a whole array of things that you could do. I mean, when I worked at Young Dundas Square, programming was a huge amount. We used to have the Friday night cinemas, the Sunday afternoon salons, music. There's all sorts of programming you can do, which would advance people walking along the Danforth, giving it a dedicated spot that's an arts related spot that doesn't take away from any of the other ideas that are happening either. It would be a complement to.
Hey, Sabina here. I think I joined late and I haven't joined one of these meetings in a while and was very, oh, is it? Sorry, can you hear? And I thought I was really excited by everyone's comments, and going back to some of Jack's comments, I think I would underline half of what he said. I think that I think everyone had great comments, and there's a need for additional vibrancy in the neighborhood. And I think there's many sectors that need support, but Witchwood Barns is not at a main intersection in Toronto, and neither is Evergreen Brickworks. And I think that's one of the things that we have to acknowledge. And as a resident that's been in the neighborhood for probably around 15 years, one of my main concerns is security. And Jack's point about having a tenant that is there all the time, that creates vibrancy, that creates support for all of the existing businesses would be incredible. And what about a space that can host all the activities that we're talking about and not creating specific spaces so that it can be animated, not 24/7, of course, because we all need to sleep, but throughout the day, throughout the week, and throughout the weekend. I currently work in an arts building and have, own a business and rent space. The reality, and most of the studio is most of the building is full with photography studios. And after 5 o'clock, it is empty. And if that building were in my community, it's not something that would further encourage community or a sense of well-being. And as boring as an anchor tenant may sound, it may be something that may make every other space 20%, 30% better.
Thanks. I think Janet Davis has had her hand up for a bit. Janet.
Thank you. First, it's great to see everybody again. I am not sure what exact space we're talking about now. Is it possible to put up the slide again to show us the final master plan recommended sites? So which is the site that will be for community use? What color is it?
If I can just clarify, the pink is the barns, the heritage barns.
Right.
The current, now this, at the moment, I believe the library is located at the corner of Hillingdon and Danforth. There is a building partially above the barns. There's the police location. And then there will be housing. One of the 3 other buildings will be housing. The TTC will no longer use the 4 stories, is my understanding. If anybody has more up-to-date information, then please.
Okay, so it's the barns themselves that will be for community use and potential. So the other part that was confusing to me, the city was going to be looking, I thought, for some potential partners and some anchor tenants. So Create TO was going to be seeking out those potential partners in some kind of process. Did that happen?
Well, Audrey, maybe if I could just start, and then I may just turn over to my colleague Anna Lee from planning. I think there's a couple of things. So when we did the master plan, we established a framework for how to guide the development of the site. And there were, ideas around, we had institutional or city partners in the TTC and TPS that needed to be accommodated on the site. So part of the exercise was to secure a site for them. So the TPS has a location. They are proceeding with the design of their work through their own public consultation process to engage community. The TTC is no longer requires the block that we had set out for them during the master plan process. We have accommodated their use on an alternative site in the East End. So we have the barns that has the TTC, and we have the library that is located at the corner of Hillingdon and Danforth. Our job, and wonderful ideas that have come up today, but this is somewhat like a Rubik's Cube, right? We need to find, 1, how the pieces fit, and then 2, how the space is curated with respect to the barn. But more importantly is to understand how we deliver affordable housing to the site because that is the direction council has given us, right? So we are now working to understand those pieces and how they can fit and how they're funded. And then there's a process whereby, you know, we can take the semblance of what we think it will look like to the community, and then ultimately a further process that actually brings on a Housing Now partner. Annalie, do you want to just add anything on the Housing Now piece since you're with us?
No, I just wondered, so if there are a variety of options, is there a final, are you saying that the location other than the police, which have, and Tobias House is already there, the library is being redeveloped, but could be somewhere else. The Barns is where it is and is preserved. And so are you still trying to figure out the actual site plan and where the massing and buildings will be? Or is there a confirmed option for where the buildings will be?
We don't, the master plan does set a framework for the type of buildings and where they're located, but where the users fall, like, so I'll just give an example. The library is currently at the corner of Hillingdon and Danforth. Can it stay there in a reconfigured space, or does it find a new home somewhere in the Barns? Those are the kinds of tests that we have to do. We need to accommodate the TTC and their office function. They have an existing office function that's currently is accommodated in the front end of the Barns. They need to remain on site as well. We need to accommodate them. And we know that there's been a request and there is a need for childcare. So we need to understand how childcare can be accommodated on the site. So those are what we call our anchor tenants. And we're trying to understand what those program needs are and how they fit to facilitate an activation of the Barns, but then to support the leveraging of the remainder of the blocks to deliver on the Housing Now.
Okay, I sort of understand that. I would simply, to give a comment if I could, I think having performance space, studio space, and an arts hub there is really needed. When we did the original consultation with East End Arts, and we consulted with all of the artists in the East End at that time, I know they have the St. Matthew's, whatever it's called on Broadview, but it's not a very large space and it really doesn't provide much in the way of performance space. So I think having an arts theme is where I would also lend my support. But I still don't really understand where this, I mean, it all depends. How do we say what we think should be there if we don't know what the space is?
Well, I think if I understood, the purpose of this evening's meeting is to talk about imagining what the barn could be, right? So I think as Stephen described this morning, the barn is about 70,000 square feet. There's a front piece along Danforth that accommodates the TTC. And there's a rear space that's about 50,000 square feet. So again, the rubrics cube is understanding how does that big space, lots of volume, how do we animate that? And then how is that integrated, again, with the objective here, as council has directed, to deliver affordable housing, right? So that's the space that we're working in. It's quite large. It's not funded. So part of what we are looking at is not only curating space, but understanding how that space is funded both from a capital perspective, but also from an ongoing operating perspective in both the interim basis and on a long-term basis. But
have you done any outreach to other potential organizational partners? I know there was a big list at some point of potential partners when?
Yeah, we have begun those discussions to outreach around what the opportunities could be. But Audrey, if we could, I'd just like to give Annalee an opportunity just to chime in on the housing, because I think it's really important to understand that the housing now component is very integral to the delivery on this site.
Thank you very much.
Okay, sure. Well, as Gabriella said, I do work with Gabriella on this and some other sites around the city where Housing Now is involved. And Housing Now is one of council's programs to use city-owned land to accelerate the delivery of new affordable housing. And the way that's done is through long-term land leases with nonprofit housing providers or developers who are entering into a contract with the city to provide affordable housing for a period of 99 years. So council did endorse, this is one of the sites in the phase 2 of the Housing Now initiative. It's not one of our largest sites, but obviously the opportunity is something that first came up through the original work that this community and others did regarding what uses should be located in the Danforth Barns. And for those of you who live in the East End, which I guess is almost all of you, you may have been aware of consultations on 2 other sites, one at 405 Sherburne, more central, and one at 1631 Queen Street East, also in Councillor Bradford's ward, where we're moving at great guns around getting approvals for affordable housing in those locations. And if you've been part of either of those consultation exercises, you'll know that what we do is engage with the community more than what would normally happen with a development application. So, you know, when you see a sign go up in your neighborhood, you might have one meeting prior to the council meeting where bylaws are introduced. The way we do Housing Now consultations is we have at least 2 public meetings, and then because we are approving just the zoning envelope, so in this case, it would be with the broader vision for the barns. We then require the future developer of the housing to have another consultation with the community when they have the site plan. So the site plan is the more detailed design pieces that go from materiality to streetscaping, etc. And we would expect that any site plans that are brought forward would be reviewed in context of what is happening with the rest of the redevelopment of the site. So we are doing the background work to really figure out how much of the site we can now look at to use for new affordable housing. The original plan that was adopted by council only had parcel F, which is facing Coxwell. We know that with changes of uses in the site, there may be a greater opportunity to accommodate more housing, but it's really something that needs to be subject to a bit of analysis before we take out a good version of options to the public. So that is something that you will hear about through Councillor Bradford, and we will be using our facilitation team Swearin Inc. to make sure they capture all stakeholder groups in the area and that they are made aware of any consultation exercises related to the housing. All of our sites focus on achieving a mix of unit sizes and types. So I've worked with Gabriella on other sites in the city where we've got a good number of 3-bedroom and 2-bedroom units, and some that are sized to the city's growing up guidelines, so larger units to support larger household compositions. So that's kind of an overview of the project. And once it launches, this will be the kind of, this will be a stakeholder group that we're going to be including in that consultation work. Gabrielle, I don't know if you expected that much from me, but you know, I had to make up for the mustache at the beginning of the meeting.
Well, thank you. And certainly many of us support affordable housing in the area. There is a concern, though, that that site is also an employment priority site as well, too. And that we really, would like to talk about the different types of employment that are possible and the ramifications of that on the construction of the buildings. Maybe it's not conventional office space. Maybe it's, there have been a lot of suggestions on various types of incubators and light industry, as I mentioned before. Maybe it's more like the old warehousing downtown that offers tremendous flexibility. So, but it is a large site with many buildings. Brian?
Yeah, I was going to say that Gabrielle, I think that the opportunity here with these ideas from tonight don't just have to be placed within the footprint of the barns. They could be on lower levels of some of the mid-rise buildings. They could be on lower floors of some of the mid-rise buildings. And what Audrey just said, which was since 2016, we've been as clear as we could that employment is important to the main street here. And I think that was incorporated in many of the council approvals at the time, that employment was to be a priority here. And so we expect that to be a consideration in the next master plan that comes back to us.
I guess I certainly, look, Megan and I are here, and Shelley, and we heard you loud and clear through the master plan process and the importance of employment and activation. We think that there are opportunities to do that through the barns. I'm just simply going to kind of table for you to consider that, there also needs to be a market for the space that, if it's traditional or other kinds of office type employment use, we need to be able to find that mix of providing space, but users who can occupy the space. And so to me, and I think to our team, this is the work that we're trying to do now, is finding the balance that achieves the objectives that the community wants to see, that maximizes our commitment to the Housing Now initiative, and that delivers this in a phased way that builds the uses on the site over time, because it's not going to be one massive kind of construction project, right? Our current thinking is that it will, sort of happen in phases. Once and greater clarity around that, when we have an understanding of how all the pieces fit together to build that kind of activation that everyone wants. And I think the last point I would make is, during the master plan process, we did retain retail consultants to assist us in understanding the space viability for it. And, the messaging that we heard through that work was, it is not the retail space that will be brought to this site that will activate. It's how that site comes together that will really spur and be a catalyst for change along that stretch of Danforth, right? And so I think nailing down what the barns could be in terms of its uses and its curation. And remember, the library is a huge and very important anchor in this project. They are a huge drawer of people, of children, of programming. I'm working with Susan and her team on another project. Their ability to program and partner, they're just outstanding at doing that. And I don't think we should, I would just, suggest that there are huge opportunities with the library to create that kind of animation and bringing people in that I think you are all looking for.
Yes, thank you, Gabriella. Fred, your
sorry, Audrey, I think we had first, it was Alex, then Katie, then
Fred.
Fred.
I'm sorry.
Fred.
Sorry. Alex.
Hi, I was just trying to figure out if I understood everyone's what they've said correctly. So it sounds like there's a consensus that we don't necessarily want a big corporation to put in a giant Loblaws there. It sounds like there's consensus that the idea of having a multi-purpose space, perhaps dedicated to the arts, that theater groups or other groups or community groups can assume temporary use of at reduced fees or subsidized fees so that it can become a useful space for them, is something people seem to agree on. It sounds like we're saying that incubating and ideas for small entrepreneurs and providing, I forget what they're called, but you know when you go on the street and it's a pop-up, I think that was the word. So to allow vendors to kind of get that nascent space would be all helpful. I do like Sabine's idea of actually having some sort of anchor there to make use of the space in a more permanent way or a steadfast way than necessarily the transient nature of pop-ups and things like that. I mean, I had the chance to go into the DMZ, which is the Ryerson incubator space for digital tech. I certainly don't think we have to necessarily compete, but I do like the idea if you build it, they may come. But I do think that we also have a lot of existing people who transit through, but don't actually stop at Coxwell and Danforth. Michael Guerin is a huge employer. A lot of people work there. A lot of people who work there come through Coxwell. There could be opportunities there that exist already. So when we're thinking about office, I'm really worried about what COVID has done in terms of the idea that maybe people don't need office space in the same way as we traditionally thought. But I think there are a lot of businesses on the street here already who are really struggling, but that there are industries already here we have to recognize. My concern with the affordable housing is not actually having new neighbors. My concern is that if I look at the school down the street, they're already into portables. I wonder when we bring on more residents, if there's been thought to actually providing them all the additional services that they'll need to inhabit the neighborhood and feel comfortable and feel welcome, whether that's language for newcomers, whether that's support for physiotherapy, if they're with physical challenges, things like that, link, whether it's learning for newcomers in English. But I do worry about when we bring all these families into 3-bedroom spaces, are there also spaces for them at the schools that are nearby? How has that been discussed at all?
I think that's a really good question, Alex. It's something that we know challenges all growth areas in the city. I mean, Danforth has a huge growth in population within the existing housing stock, let alone what is coming through new development. And we've seen North York Center and Yonge and Eglinton deal with this challenge. So what I can say is that we have obviously a critical need for new affordable housing in the city, and we have a city asset, which is land, that we can use to help support addressing that need. The challenge we face with respect to how schools are funded from a provincial perspective is one that we come up against when we deal with every new development. The TDSB has a very strong planning department that is aware of the number of new pupils that may be generated by development size and type. And they have the opportunity where possible to advocate for special funding with a special business case in certain areas. And they have one opportunity a year to make that case. All school boards across the province have that opportunity. So I'm not saying that there isn't significant growth in Danforth, but we also know that the TDSB has sought to dispose of some of its schools in the Danforth area over time. They haven't done so, but they've turned leases over to other school boards, for example, to operate. So the land does exist, and it's just a challenge we face. But it's not something that's going to stop us from approving new affordable housing.
Great, thank you. Who was next? Was it you, Kathy?
Yeah, I just want a clarification on the number of basically units that have been approved for the site. So are you suggesting, or are you saying that it's going that number to be increased for the Housing Now project?
When I mentioned that we're looking at if the move of TTC for some of its anchor space into another location may expand our opportunity, we don't know what the total number of units are. There is what Block F, that space on Block F could yield maybe 100 new units, maybe more. But we know what our objective is to use good planning principles to see how we can use this city asset to deliver as many new affordable housing units that fits into the basket of good planning, good design, and high quality spaces for residents within a neighborhood context that can support the population. So that's where we're at. And that's the kind of detail we're going to share with you when we're at the stage where we can engage in consultation specifically related to the housing on the site.
And how much the community has, has to say. The community can make a decision, or that decision has been made by the city that we are moving forward.
The decision has been made that this will be a location for new affordable housing. That's council endorsed. What hasn't been decided is the look and feel of the building, how it interacts within the block, within the Danforth Garage. You know, DTA is a great consultant that will consider what the opportunities are to do a really great integrated model on the site. But I don't want to say that there's an opportunity to say no housing here, because council has approved this as a location for new housing. And I invite you to go to the Housing Now website. You can go to createto.ca/housing now, and you will see the range of sites citywide. We are now at 17 sites across the city, and all of our public meeting materials are posted on that website, and you can get a sense of the quality of design and the emphasis we place on the public realm as we bring forward these buildings.
One more question, and sorry, Audrey, about the comment that Gabriella made about Toronto Library, particularly in relation with the barn. Is there any plan to move the library to the barn?
So I would say, I'm not going to rule out that that's not a possibility, and how that might fit within the broader context of the barns is, you know, something that we're looking at. It's also something that we need to engage with our partners at TPL, because they have a functional program. We need to know that we can meet the functional program if that's, you know, if that's the space for them. So like, we just don't have a clear line of sight right now. We're working to understand where the potential and where the opportunities to move that are, and if it fits and works within their program requirement. Remember as well that one of the principles, and Megan, you can help me out here, that was part of the master plan, is that the garage actually functions as an east-west connection through the block. So it may well be like right now we may be thinking, oh, 50,000 square feet is just going to be jammed with a whole bunch of activity. But, you know, it could be an integration of uses that then support that kind of a spine of an east-west connection that links, you know, the potential for the Parquet and then the Coxwell frontages. So I think, you know, the grandeur and the volume of that space offers some really interesting opportunities to, you know, certainly the things that you have talked about this evening are things that can be part of the barns, or, you know, I think it was Stephen who indicated, you know, there's a whole Danforth frontage, and what does that look like if the library doesn't occupy its current space? What does the Coxwell frontage at grade look like? So I think right now, I think as Audrey, you know, clearly stated, is, and Annalie said, we're trying to work that out to be able to frame the discussion, because just going out with nothing, it's difficult to have the conversation. And I think there's a great complexity in this site. Just the complexity of the barn, its heritage structure, finding something that will activate, something that is sustainable over the long term. and delivery of the housing, as well as the phasing of all of this project, so that we deliver on all the pieces at the same time. So not at the same time, but that we deliver it over in a very clear, systematic way that provides you with access to the barn on an interim basis, but has a longer term vision for the site that's sustainable.
Audrey, or
can we have Fred speak? Yeah.
Well, Audrey, if I may, there was some questions about the housing component I noticed in the chat, and just while we're on the topic, if I may just respond to that to provide a bit of clarity. Two individuals asked about how incomes would be integrated, or affordability levels would be integrated in the building. And I just wanted to point to the fact that Housing Now is a program that includes up to 50% new affordable rental in every development. And the affordable rental is at 80% of average market rent, but we do require at least 10% of the units to be offered at 40% of average market rent. So that really is a deep level of affordability for those 10% of units. And in addition, households who qualify for the new affordable rental units may also apply other housing subsidies, either through Ontario Works or through ODSP, that they may be eligible for towards their rent to help deal with the affordability. So we are 50% at market, and then up to 50% at market, between 33 and 50%. And then the balance is delivered at that level of affordability that I just spoke to. In this area, in the East End, around Danforth, 80% of average market rent really does a lot better than, say, other locations in the city, because average market rent is generally higher in this area. So we're looking at average market rent for all of the cities. So it really does represent a lower rent level than what is standard for the Danforth area.
Thank you. Fred, you've been waiting very patiently.
Did Fred give up on us?
Fred?
No, Fred can't figure out how to unmute.
Oh.
It's actually Pat. And I just had a comment, but I guess it was alluded to by one of the previous speakers, that since the whole process will take place, the building over multiple years, we need to not just look long-term, but look at maybe interim uses that could transition well to permanent uses, or just what will we do with the space when it's still in progress.
Yes.
I think that would be worthwhile considering, as opposed to just blue skying the ultimate design.
Yes, no, that's very important part of the discussion.
Yeah.
And because activating the space for who knows how long will potentially contribute a great deal of vitality to the community.
That's right.
And
you have to do it right that way. Start out on the right foot.
Yes. No, that's a good point. I think that we're getting very close to the end of our time, and Stephen will, as I mentioned, close things up. I just want to make a plug for DECA. If people haven't joined the organization, please go to deca.to and join, because we appreciate, we need volunteers. We're volunteer run, and we also, through these kind of events, feel that we can, well, we can organize for the community. Thank you. Sorry, that was very clear.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to close up by thanking everybody for attending. Our city staff from various departments for coming out and in their evening to speak with us. And it is great to see some of our former elected representatives, as well as Brad and Brad's office staff. I think it's great that continuing commitment to the neighborhood is really quite encouraging. The other point I really think is important right now is that that we continue this conversation, that this just not be tonight. Audrey's mentioned that DECA is still going to be taking input for the coming week, so until May 25th. And the email address for that is visioning@deca.to. That's correct? Yeah, okay. And one other thing, Rebecca, at the very start of this, the first chat item, I had put a picture there, and if we could just toss that up. My long-term view, and I think the view of a lot of people, you know, and going back, is that office or some kind of employment should be our priority here. And I think that was largely influenced from a discussion with Jane Jacobs many years ago. And that can still be accommodated with a significant component from housing now. But I think we've also got to think, and Fred just mentioned it, you know, we've got to think the interim uses and short-term stuff. And this picture here was just one I took while walking along the Danforth today. There's that dreadful, beaten down, neglected space that gets mowed now and again in front of the site. It's a great opportunity for a guerrilla gardening project, or, you know, something to bring the TTC in. So think big, think small, think long-term, think in the interim, but keep the conversation going. Have conversations with your neighbors too, people who couldn't make it here tonight, and maybe they can also get their ideas in. Okay.
And Councillor
Anyway,
Bradford.
And Brad.
Sure. Well, I will be brief because I'm standing in the way of your last glass of wine, or maybe beer for the evening. But you know, this is fantastic. This was great for me. I've been just jotting down notes all night from your ideas and input, and it's very helpful. This has been a long journey, but it's a journey that DECA and this group of volunteers, and Audrey and Brian and Rebecca and Steve and Ann and Billy, Kathy, Ashley, Katie, everyone that's been involved in shaping this from the beginning. And in our corner of Toronto and in the East End here, we have a rich history of city building, and DECA is an organization, Danforth East Community Organization, that is here to stand for something rather than stand against something. And I always reference this community group as something special, because a lot of the time you get a residents association that comes about, and the genesis of that is really opposition to a development, opposition to change, you know, a bunch of people coming together to say no. This group and the people that are on the line tonight, and we had nearly 70 folks at peak, this is a group that is about hope and aspiration and making our little corner of Toronto something special, something that we can share and enjoy with our neighbors, but of course, something that we can offer for the entire city. So huge thanks to the DECA visioning team. You've always been leaders. I always look up to you, and you always provide great advice. Big thanks to our staff as well. Gabriella from Create TO, Annalie and Megan from DTA, and Susan from Libraries. This, of course, is not a formal City of Toronto meeting, and so you're here because you're passionate about this project. You love city building. You care about our neck of the woods out here, and we're grateful for that. You're consummate professionals, and I know we're going to get to a good outcome with your help. So thank you for that. Based on everything I heard tonight, you know, like, there was a lot of really, really good ideas, a lot of thoughtful input, and I think Gabriella's points about we have a framework, DTA, DTAH. Megan, I never know how you want it said, but either way, they provided us with a framework, and that's important to remember. Things have changed, things have evolved since 2018. There's been a new provincial government. There's been a lot of changes around planning and major transit station areas. There's been a new planning study, Danforth planning study, and we're living in a global pandemic. We're living in a housing crisis here in Toronto. Things continue to evolve. So I think this moment where we come together to, you know, spell out some of our aspirations and our hopes for this site, I really kept hearing the theme of hub, a hub for the arts, a hub for performance, a hub for languages, a hub for entrepreneurs, makers, small business. All of these things have been core themes here in the East End, but certainly something that we want to see manifest on this very, very special site. And it will be a gift not just to our neighborhood, but to the entire city of Toronto. We've seen this success with programs like Destination Danforth. We've seen what we can do when we come together as neighborhood to make this place really special. And what a gift, what an opportunity this is going to be. So employment is a priority. That has landed in plans like the Danforth planning study and the main planning study, which of course is being appealed right now. The biggest thing that those folks are appealing on OPA 478 is of course the employment piece. And we're working through that. But I think, I don't know if it was Jack or somebody made the point earlier, that might change and that might evolve given the world that we're in. And employment in a traditional notion of office, well, we want to encourage people to come to the East End and not just downtown. And I think there's a lot of validity of that. Stephen Wickens has been a huge leader on all the latent capacity on our subways going off peak, for sure, absolutely right. But employment can mean things like, non-residential, community services, facilities, creative industry, music, arts, tourism, institutional, studio, cultural space. So all of these sort of things, non-res and not retail, there's still a great